The Things We Carry by Anne Lamott. An old friend took a photograph of my mother and me on Stinson Beach last month on the 4th of July. We're holding hands in the picture, as in fact we were doing all day because she feels very unsteady walking on the sand. In the photo, I happened to be looking over at her with enormous gentleness, which is what I was feeling about half the time. The rest of the time, I was annoyed. I was annoyed because she acts older than she is. She is only 73, but she totters along in the sand like a drunk, or as a toddler. I was annoyed because she gets everything wrong all the time. I was feeling betrayed because she was not who I would have picked in the Neiman Marcus mommy salon. Nana, my son calls out when he sees my mother. We were sitting on the sand by then. I got a bit by a yellow jacket. She gapes at him, makes sympathetic noises, admires the bite as if it's a bullet hole. Let's go for a walk, she says. He doesn't want to. He always wants to race down to the shore and just plunge in. But he likes her. He's glad to be with her. The fact that she's wearing a sweater does not seem to annoy him. I watch carefully. I tell you, families are definitely the training ground for forgiveness. At some point, you forgive the people in your family for being stuck together in all this weirdness. And when you can do that, you can learn to forgive anyone, even yourself at some point. It's like learning to drive an old Volkswagen bus. Master that, and you can learn to drive anything.
As a minister, I see families at some of their most tender times. A child dedication, a wedding, a memorial service, and the crises in between. I carry these snapshots of families I have met, not in a book that would be too large to physically carry, but in a way that deepens and enriches my ministry, preparing me for the next family that poses for a brief time in front of my minister's eye. This sermon comes with a label that says metaphor warning, for those expecting a more linear approach, a how-to for creating or surviving a family. I haven't got one. All I have is a photograph and a metaphor, experience and training, the tools of my trade as your minister. I was unfamiliar with the Confucian concept of li until I met a man who was dying. I asked him to tell me about his parents, and he told me about the li. I know more now because this dying man painted a portrait of his parents as people who respected the importance of ritual in family life. They expected certain behaviors based on the roles they each occupied. The picture I still hold in my mind's eye is one of gentleness and reverence. The li is not a concept that many of us would choose to adopt today. We have rejected what we think of as rigid ritual. We have rejected an authoritarian parenting style. It's so hard I can't even say it. Authoritarian parenting style. Because many of us are damaged from the children should be seen and not heard school of parenting. Reacting to our own unanswered wounds, we overcompensate by having no authority whatsoever with our own children. Family therapist and ordained Rabbi Edwin Friedman recommended the middle, more compassionate way when he wrote, "Children have a right to be heard, but parents have an obligation to be clear." I imagine it does not surprise you that Unitarian Universalists have a few issues when it comes to authority. No? We are the religious descendants of heretics. Unitarians who rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, and Universalists who rejected an exclusionary doctrine of salvation. Michael Servetus was burned at the stake for denying the Trinity and the authority of the church. Scientist and Unitarian minister Joseph Priestley was forced to leave England and then live in Pennsylvania because of his heretical views. And John Murray, often referred to as the father of American Universalism, was forced to leave his English Methodist congregation when he started preaching the idea of universal salvation. When people find themselves at a Unitarian Universalist congregation for the first time, they often exclaim, "I was a UU all along and I didn't even know it." They might as well be exclaiming, "I have always questioned authority and now I have found a place that's all about questioning authority." Reacting to our own unanswered wounds, we overcompensate by rebelling against any form of authority. Taking a page from Rabbi Friedman's book, we can affirm that everyone has a right to be heard, and leaders have an obligation to be clear. Well, I've entered dangerous territory now. Not only have I started mixing metaphors, but I have compared the congregation to a family. Most church management experts would caution against this comparison. Thinking about a congregation as one's family keeps the church small. It is also a messy metaphor. A family has shared history, private stories, and shortcut ways of speaking to each other that often exclude the outside world. A family, especially one in crisis, can be inward focused. A family, or at least some of its individual members, can be annoying. In a photo of writer Anne Lamott and her mother, the writer looks at her mother with gentleness. This, she reminds us, is a snapshot of one particular moment in time. Take the photograph one moment later, and we would see the writer looking annoyed. Lamott writes a lot about the mess that families can make. Sometimes people who read her work send her photos of their families. She tapes them to her wall to remind herself to be more forgiving than annoyed, more compassionate than disturbed. There is nothing more touching to me than a family picture where everyone is trying to look his or her best, and you can see what a mess they all really are, Lamott writes. Frozen in the amber of the photograph, she says, you can see all the connections and disconnections, the stress and the yearning. The source of authority for Confucians was ritual imposed from the outside. The rituals and rites that defined society were to be performed with a proper attitude of reverence, eagerness, joy, and at times reluctance or even sadness. Proper attitudes arose from careful attention to the smallest of details, a gesture or a facial expression. What the Li can teach us is that rules, imbued with compassion, can provide structure in a chaotic world. Structure like children have a right to be heard, but parents have an obligation to be clear. How do we do this? How do we find a 21st century equivalent to the Li that isn't overly rigid or isn't overly permissive. Just stand for a few minutes in a bookstore in front of the self-help section, and you'll find hundreds of suggestions about how to raise children, heal from the effects of your family of origin, and how to be codependent no more. Depth psychology, 12 step groups, and Western adaptations of Eastern philosophies all offer tools to examine our place in the family, to self-differentiate from family-imposed identities, and to, in general, untangle ourselves from the webby enmeshment of 21st century family. In all of our wandering from therapist to group to guru, we will eventually bump into our relationship with authority. We will eventually have to come to terms with what we learned from our family about power and what, in turn, we teach our children about authority and power. After writing the song Teach Your Children Well in 1968, Graham Nash discovered a famous photograph, or what has now become famous, by Diane Arbus called Child with Toy Hand Grenade in Central Park. Nash is said to have commented that the photograph captured the theme of his song. You who are on the road must have a code that you can live by, Nash told the generation who at the time was very visibly rebelling against their own authoritative parents. Teach your children well, their father's hell did slowly go by, and feed them on your dreams, the one they picked, the one you're known by. This tangled mess of identity, authority, power that we inherit from our families. The photo captures a boy in one moment in time, clenching a toy replica hand grenade. His face is caught in a maniacal grin, expressing the frustration of a long photo shoot. In later interviews, as a teenager, the young man states that he was uncomfortable with a photograph that he thought made fun of him. In later interviews still, the man, now middle-aged, reflects that the photo captured more than just his frustration with a long photo shoot. His parents had recently divorced. He was exploding with loneliness. A powerless child expressing the only kind of power he knew, represented by a toy replica hand grenade and a face he'd learned from war movies. Teach your children well, the songwriter reminds us. The man who taught me about the Lee eventually died, of course. I was asked to be present with the family as they mourned, and I couldn't help but notice that the Lee no longer ruled the subsequent generations. As messy as the rest of us as members of 21st century families, they groped around in the darkness of their grief, stuck together in the weirdness of the lives they had patched together with love. At some point, you forgive the people in your family for being stuck together in all this weirdness. And when you can do that, you can learn to forgive anyone, even yourself at some point, writes Anne Lamott. This forgiveness is the beginning of creating a compassionate family life. One last snapshot from my ministry that I will always carry with me is from another death, from another family's tender time. Every time I walk into a room to be with a family during a tender time. I bring my tradition's ambivalence about authority with me. I also bring the awareness that in the late 20th and the early 21st centuries, clergy authority in general has been on the decline. With the rise of those who no longer identify with any religious institution and those who identify as spiritual but not religious, I know I walk into a room with people of varying respect for the stand I take as a minister called to serve families in their tender times. I do not carry with me any connection to the apostolic succession, which would give me authority in some Christian churches. I do not have a direct pipeline to God. All I have is a photograph and a metaphor, experience and training, the tools of my trade as a Unitarian Universalist minister. This last snapshot is of a family in Utah. While I served 2 churches in Utah and Idaho, I had the privilege to conduct memorial services of members of our congregations who were former Mormons. Anne Lamott's image of family as being stuck together in all this weirdness is particularly true of families that have been fractured by religion. As I gathered with the family in my office prior to the service, a member of the pastoral care team whispered in my ear, "They will want a prayer." Good to know, I thought, because I don't often know. Many Unitarian Universalists do not pray, so I often have to ask for permission to pray or sort of feel my way through what the listening in the room is. Looking at the makeup of this particular room, the deceased's brother, who was a Mormon, the UU ex-wife, the ex-wife's current husband, religion unknown, the deceased's Mormon parents, the deceased's son, and on again, off again, Unitarian Universalist, living as he did between 2 households. Looking at the makeup of the room of all these people in various places in their relationship with religion, I did what I often do. I explained that some of us pray and some of us don't. But that gathering for a moment of centering prayer at a moment like this helped us all to be prepared for the grief that may surprise us in the ritual of the memorial service. Rituals help hold emotions that are too big for our bodies to contain. Prayer prepares us. The group gathered in my office agreed to pray, and as I inhaled to start the prayer, the Mormon brother began, "Father God." In an instant, I thought that maybe what the member of my pastoral care team had whispered in my ear was, "The brother will want to lead the prayer." It wasn't until later, and this is so true, it wasn't until later that I learned that Mormons do not believe in women leading prayer. The lead that they follow places the authority firmly with the man. The code they live by is different, some would say more rigid, than what calls me to be with families in their tender times. I agree with Anne Lamott. At some point, we ought to forgive the people in our human family for being stuck together in all this weirdness. A Mormon man may have led the prayer in my office, but it was a Unitarian Universalist woman who led the memorial service. And it was a Mormon man, the same man, the deceased man's brother, who came up to me after it was all over to say that his brother had always wanted him to light a candle in his church, in his chosen Unitarian Universalist faith. And the deceased man's brother said to me in that moment, "Would it be okay if I lit that candle now?" "May it be so, and amen," I said. I know that many here live in fractured families, fractured by religion, and that when that family gathers in a room for tender times, that we all need to listen carefully, to forgive a little perhaps, to start from compassion, to speak to all of the listening in the room. I did plan to end early today, and I did good. So we have this meeting at 10:30, and if you are visiting with us today, please chat with us for a moment over there, and if you want to see how the democratic process works in Unitarian Universalism, we invite you to stay for the meeting. But now let's join in the words to extinguish the chalice, which are found in your order of service. We
are the Caneo Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Our mission is to nurture spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion. Like us on Facebook, check out our website at CVUUF.org, or come visit us. See you soon!